I'm Jim Kircher, and we're going to start off with some literary history, actually quite a bit of literary history. I mean, after all, two of America's most prominent post-war playwrights emerged from this city. They both have stars here on the Walk of Fame. But while just about everybody's familiar with Tennessee Williams, a lot of folks would probably have to stop to read about William Inge. The two men first met here in St. Louis, and they knew each other well. They were friends and sometimes rivals.
There's no doubt that Inge was, in some ways, if we just look at their work in the 1950s, that Inge was the more celebrated playwright.
Henry Schway is a drama professor at Washington University, where Tennessee Williams had been a student and where later Inge was an English instructor. During his years in St. Louis, he was writing and developing the work and style that would take him to Broadway. Inge wrote a string of successful Broadway plays that were made into Hollywood films: Come Back Little Sheba, Picnic, Bus Stop, Dark at the Top of the Stairs, and his Oscar-winning screenplay for Splendor in the Grass. How come we don't know him better? How come Tennessee Williams is this, I don't mean just in St. Louis, everybody knows about Tennessee Williams, I think. I think William Inge has sort of faded away a little bit.
Yes,
maybe not in your world of drama. But
no. Well, even in my world of drama, I mean, how often are Inge's plays produced? Not often.
In early 2020, the Webster Conservatory did stage Picnic. It's set in a small Midwestern town. The characters include the local beauty queen, her tomboy sister, the rich young man, the spinster school teacher with a drinking problem, the hunky drifter who enters their lives. Molly Burris played beauty queen Madge.
I mean, I reread Picnic when we were doing the auditions, and I finished it and I went, oh, okay. I was like, this show is dated, you know, it's got some tropes, but then I have a very, very deep love and appreciation for the character.
It was because of these kinds of plays, the settings, the characters, the themes, that William Inge became known as the playwright of the Midwest. William Inge was born in the town of Independence, Kansas in 1913. His father was a traveling salesman. His mother ran their home as a boarding house for unmarried women school teachers. He was a smart, talented kid. He was teased by fellow schoolboys as a sissy. He was a collector of movie star photographs, and he liked to perform for the adults. In college, he wanted to be an actor, but he ended up teaching, first in a high school and then for 5 years at Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri. He began to do some writing, but not seriously, and he wasn't happy there. For much of his life, William Inge was filled with self-doubt and depression.
And he turned fairly early on to alcohol as a way of dealing with that.
For much of his life, Inge would undergo psychiatric treatment. And he was, as you pretty much had to be back then, a closeted homosexual. It was something he had difficulty coming to terms with, something that increased his sense of isolation. In 1943, Inge made the move that opened all kinds of new opportunities. He was hired to be the arts critic for the St. Louis Star-Times, reviewing plays, concerts, movies, exhibits, even the ice capades. St. Louis was really the first big city he lived in, the first place with a large underground gay community. It was in many ways liberating. He was free from teaching, he was writing for a living, and was immersed in the theater world. But he was still drinking too much. His co-workers knew little about his private life. They saw he was a hard worker. They noticed the hangovers. Inge and Tennessee Williams met for the first time here, where Inge had an apartment north of downtown. It was 1944, and Tennessee Williams had already happily left St. Louis behind, but he would come back to visit his mother. And he was here on his way to Chicago for the pre-Broadway opening of the Glass Menagerie. Williams came to Inge's apartment to be interviewed for a story that would run in the St. Louis Star-Times, and immediately they hit it off. Yeah, they were both gay, and biographers generally agree they had a physical relationship at some point, but it was more than that. They had a lot of shared interests: art, music, theater, and similar family backgrounds.
They both were peculiar kids, but whereas Williams in some ways embraced his difference, Inge always felt unhappy.
In late December of 1944, Inge went to Chicago to see the opening of his new friend's play. The Glass Menagerie was Tennessee Williams' semi-autobiographical work set in St. Louis, and seeing that play was a turning point in Inge's life.
And I think that was a kind of thunderclap, and it signaled to Inge, maybe this is possible. Even though there was not a lot of separation in terms of age between the two, there was a kind of role model. And he must have felt, Inge must have felt, if Williams can do this, maybe, just maybe, I can too.
By the time Glass Menagerie opened on Broadway, just a few months later, William Inge had already completed his own first play, Farther Off from Heaven. Tennessee Williams connected Inge with his agent, who felt the play was good but not good enough for Broadway. But it would be staged in Dallas, and Inge would later rework it into Dark at the Top of the Stairs. His next play, Front Porch, was put on in St. Louis. This play would become the basis for Picnic. And in fact, elements of most of his successful work on Broadway really first began to take shape in those years in St. Louis. As Inge began to focus on his writing, he lost his job at the Star-Times to a returning veteran and was hired here at Washington University as an English instructor. But he really now saw himself as a playwright. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was determined, desperate really, to succeed. He sent another play to New York. He said at the time, "If the play doesn't make it, I'm through." The play was Come Back Little Sheba, and it did make it. This was his ticket out of teaching and out of St. Louis, and he left for New York. Come Back Little Sheba was followed by Picnic, which had one of its pre-Broadway openings here in St. Louis, with a young Paul Newman in the cast. Picnic would win the 1953 Pulitzer Prize for Drama. Just as Williams had done, Inge was drawing on his own life experiences. The small town, characters dealing with alcoholism and repressed sexuality, aging, discontentment. These were people, these were things he knew firsthand.
We were asked that at a talkback, which character do you think William Inge wrote for himself? And we kind of came to the conclusion that every character in Picnic has a sort of representation of Inge.
After Picnic, two more successful Broadway plays would follow, and at the 1962 Academy Awards, an Oscar. But by the mid-1960s, neither William Inge nor Tennessee Williams would achieve the critical or popular success of their early works. But Williams rolled with the punches, became a literary star, embraced his celebrity. Inge struggled, deeply affected by failure and criticism. And the playwright of the Midwest was beginning to be written off as the playwright of the 1950s.
For better or worse, Inge's career is perceived, not that he stopped writing, but perceived as being framed by that single decade. And so we associate him with 50s values.
First of all, it brings a lot of comfort, shows like Picnic, because people can kind of sit back and relax and just escape away to a different place. But I don't necessarily think still that Picnic is a very new and innovative and thought-provoking show that should be produced as a revival on Broadway.
Other Pulitzer Prize-winning plays from the same era have had more staying power than Picnic. Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire, Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. But while Inge's plays may not have aged well, in his time, he was at the top. He'd achieved the success, fame, fortune, but not the happiness he'd pursued. Always a loner, in the end, he felt a failure, struggling with drugs and depression. In 1973, shortly after his 60th birthday, William Inge committed suicide. The playwright of the Midwest is buried in his hometown of Independence, Kansas. In different ways, St. Louis helped shape two of the most successful playwrights of post-war America, and it was here their paths crossed. And this place and that relationship, especially for William Inge, changed everything. He went on to establish a solid reputation that was built on a very fragile foundation. For Living St. Louis, I'm Jim Kircher.